as a full-time job for them, responsible for creating ways in which the organization and the community spark each other.
Right. I don't think mine is quite
Yours
that
is
involved.
not like
Not
that.
quite
No,
that involved.
No, it's not, because your full-time job is playing the bassoon.
That's right. Yeah.
Or your 32-week
Right.
job. Right. But what are some of the things you do? You speak before every concert.
I speak before every concert to the audience assembled. It's actually because of my position physically in the orchestra, I don't often have very much connection with the audience. So it's amazing to me to sit on the front, or to stand on the front of the stage and look out and see the faces.
But you know, that's
a
an
wonderful
interesting
experience.
thing, because as opposed to other forms of art and entertainment, orchestras, at least in America, seem to walk out on the stage and not contact the audience at all.
Yeah.
You come out, you sit there, you talk to each other, you noodle on your instruments, you do important practicing,
Right.
but there's not a sense that you're acknowledging the audience. And I imagine when you sit in the middle of the orchestra, as you do as a bassoonist, that you cannot look at the audience if you
There are times when I
to.
have finished symphonies and was shocked that there were people there and applauding, because you're playing the symphony, you're playing the music,
Right.
and all of a sudden all these people are applauding.
Whereas without those people, there's no orchestra.
That's right.
And in a certain way, no point in having an orchestra if
right.
somebody's not listening.
Yeah.
So-
My father always reminded me of the important role that music serves to our culture and to people's souls, which is a really interesting thing. That, when it is your job and you do it every day and you work hard at it, you don't often think that people are really being affected, which is why these emails are so edifying.
Right.
And just to remind everyone, there are people who really need this.
And when you're in music school practicing your bassoon excerpts, preparing for auditions, you actually may not think the ultimate thing I'm doing in playing these bassoon excerpts and someday in an orchestra playing the actual music is reaching people as part of this totality.
I think that the conservatories are doing a much better job of conveying that than they did when I was there.
Right. I used to be music editor of Entertainment Weekly magazine, and one of the franchises that magazine had was explaining what goes on when TV shows are shot, when movies are made, when pop albums are recorded. People were hungry to find that stuff out. And what goes on in an orchestra is just as interesting, but you don't really hear much about it.
No. And that's how I actually began when I introduced myself to the audience the other week. And I just said, I'm going to tell you some things that you don't see on stage and we try to hide from you. But it's kind of important for you to know.
What?
Well, I mean, there was such an obvious example of the first piece we did. With Nemi Järvi, we do a lot of Scandinavian music, which is wonderful. It's very interesting. But we did the third Swedish Rhapsody by Hugo Alvens.
Okay. Yeah.
So I asked first I asked the audience how many people have ever heard of this composer, and there were 3 or 4 people. And then I asked the orchestra, and there were 3 or 4 musicians there too. So there was a balance there. That was very good. But it starts off, and I just told the story of the first rehearsal where I came in, and my part, I have rest for a long time. And so the maestro began the downbeat, and the bassist played, and they just held this G that went a very low rumble, very quiet. And all of a sudden there was a wind instrument playing, but there was no one around me playing it. And it wasn't a typical orchestral wind instrument, but it was an off-stage saxophone.
Oh my God.
So, even right there, there's a secret. So the question is, at the concert, does that saxophone have to wear his jacket, or does it get to be a little bit more comfortable backstage? Is it really hard to play that far away from the orchestra? All those things that are kind of natural things. And at one concert, Järvi didn't want to disclose what the instrument was. All he would say was, it's not an instrument we use very often. At the other concert, he wanted to talk about the saxophone a little bit, and how this is, just the right instrument, and the fact that if it were on stage, it would be too present. But this way, people were not maybe startled by the fact that they couldn't find who was playing that instrument. They knew that fact, or they were prepared for something that they weren't going to see.
I'm trying to think of other pieces begin with offstage instruments. You expect that later on. And normally what you see, if you're observant, is the members of the orchestra, like the trumpets, let's say, getting up and heading off stage to play.
Sure.
And so here it's quite a surprise.
It was quite, a very unique feature, but the whole nature of rhapsodies is that they're kind of schizophrenic, and you have, these amazingly fast happy parts, and you have these very long, drawn-out, sorrowful moments where very reflective kind of stuff. And this piece really went back and forth like that.
What reaction do you get from the audience?
I think people are really thrilled to hear something new, something they've been, I think, deprived of for too long. The fact that, first of all, we're people playing this music. And that we didn't know this music before Tuesday, and boy, don't we really do it well on Thursday night.
Yep.
That's also pretty much of an amazing thing for people, that we haven't been rehearsing this for weeks, and that we actually are at a level where we get together on Tuesday not having heard a piece, and by Thursday night it sounds like a piece.
I was once involved last season in a whole series of discussions with members of the Pittsburgh Symphony audience. Something the orchestra hired me to do to develop more of a relationship with its audience, and particularly get them to begin taking some ownership and talking to the orchestra about what they thought. So there had been a program with a Schoenberg piece and a Berio piece, two atonal pieces in one program, quite a lot for the audience to take. And naturally there was a lot of discussion of that, but I admired one member of the orchestra who said that one of the reasons the audience might not have clearly understood what was going on is that the orchestra still didn't, that it didn't know either piece well yet. And maybe they needed to play a little more for it to settle before they could really make a statement. I thought that was an amazing thing.
Very brave.
It was. It was. Maybe not something you could say to 2,000 people at once, something you could say to 50 people. Or,
I won't try that one. I don't think I'll try that.
No, I don't think you should, because the conductor might object. So I'm sure colleagues might object. But in Cleveland, where I had a brief conversation on stage with their music director, Franz Welser-Murst, before a concert as part of their attempt to open themselves up more to the audience. Well, it was a very short conversation, but it was radical for them, and I went back in the house afterward to hear Franz conduct the piece, actually because what he said interested me so much that I wanted to hear the piece again, because I'd heard it in earlier concerts. Anyway, so do this, and after the concert, I'm heading backstage to see people in the orchestra, and people in the audience stop me and they say, "You broke down the wall between them and us." And I thought, well, for one thing, you couldn't pay somebody to say that.
That's what we're on for.
But that is what it's about, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I think as a musician in an orchestra, I'm always amazed that people are astounded that we do what we do, and they think that we're such stars and all this kind of stuff. And just to be near us is a wonderful experience. And I don't feel that way about my dentist or people who just do their jobs. It's, I think, oh, a nice guy, and that's okay. But the fact that we're on a stage, that we're lit, that we're very formal about how we come on and off, puts us in much more of a tradition that doesn't necessarily relate so well. I mean, not to mention the fact that we're dressed in 18th century costumes. And
what do you think about that, by the way? Do you think that should change?
I would love it if every concert were different. And that the audience never knew what to expect. I think that would be so dramatic. This week we're doing children's concerts, and we're doing them in T-shirt and jeans. So at least the kids, they probably don't know one way or the other what the orchestra should be dressed like. But at least we're dressing like them, which I think is a really important thing. I have not seen too many people in white tie and tails in our audience.
Funny about that.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah, I don't think they probably own those clothes.
Probably not. They're hard to find these days, actually.
Is that true? That
there are very few places to buy them. So.
Oh man, something
fewer
else,
and fewer
something else that's going to have to go into the orchestra musician's curriculum in music school.
Where to get tails.